we already had discussion on how TDS is deductible on commission and brokerage, and we talked about its exemption limits and when it is non-applicable, when we are paying certain commission or brokerage to BSNL employees, right? Or MTNL employees. So this was the exemption. Now we will talk about the next TDS section, that is rent. Any person not being an individual or HUF. Remember, this is very important in rent section, that the person should not be an individual or he should not be an HUF who is responsible for paying to a resident any income by way of rent shall deduct income tax thereon, right? So if I'm paying rent, maybe on a property, maybe on machinery, maybe on any plant or equipment, TDS is deductible, provided I'm not an individual, I'm not an HUF. So machinery or plant or equipment is 2%. Land or building or land to a building, including factory building or furniture or fittings, is 10%, right? The deduction of tax is to be made at the time of credit of such income to the account of pay or at the time of payment thereof in cash or by the issue of check or draft or by any other mode, whichever is earlier, right? So TDS, when it is to be deducted, when I am actually paying that rent. Now, what is the exemption limit? No deduction shall be made under this section where the amount of such income or the case may be the aggregate of the amounts of such income credited or paid or likely to be credited or paid during the financial year by the aforesaid person to the account. So basically, they are saying that whatever amount is paid or seemed to be paid, whatever is like to be credited, means there is an amount. When we say likely to be credited, means we have already decided the amount to be credited. We are aware of that amount. So we will, if that amount we know does not exceed, that is the rent amount does not exceed 2,40,000, this is the exemption limit, we will not deduct tax at source. And this was inserted by Act number 12 of 2020 with effect 1st April 2020. Now, when this TDS is non-applicable, no deduction shall be made under this section where the income by way of rent is credited or paid to a business trust. This is, see, the exemption limit and non-applicability of TDS is different. Exemption limit is the amount up to which TDS should not be deducted. If I'm paying certain amount within this limit, no TDS is deducted, right? And if I'm paying beyond that exemption limit, TDS has to be deducted. But now when I talk about non-applicability of TDS, what does that mean? It means that this section is not applicable whatever the amount be, right? This section is not applicable if this is the case. So even if it is crossing the exemption limit, in this case, the TDS will not be applicable. So no deduction shall be made under this section where the income by way of rent is credited or paid to a business trust, being a real estate investment trust in respect of any real estate asset referred to in section 1023 FCA owned directly by such business trust, right? So this is the non-applicability case where rent is being credited to a business trust, being a real estate investment trust, means it's their business, it's in the real estate case, and it is paid in respect of a real estate asset, right? Now, next says payment on transfer of certain immovable property other than agricultural land. So if I'm transferring any property other than agricultural land, what is the case of TDS? What is the exemption limit? What is the exemption amount? What are the rates on which TDS is deductible, and why we are doing this? This is because we should know these limits before we are working on tally, and we should know how and what amount of TDS is deducted. Now, any person being a transferee responsible for paying other than the person referred to in section 194LA to a resident transferor any sum by way of consideration for transfer of any immovable property other than agricultural land shall of the time of credit of such sum to the account of the transferor or at the time of payment of such sum in cash or by issue of a check or draft or by any other mode, whichever is earlier, deduct an amount equal to 1% of such sum as income tax thereon. So it says that any person being a transferee means, suppose I am having the ownership of certain immovable property. So I am transferring this property to person B. So person B is transferee and I am transferor, right? I am selling my property to person B. So person B is transferring. Person B is responsible for paying me, right? Certain amount against that immovable property, provided that immovable property is not the agricultural land, right? So he is responsible for paying to a resident, that is me, that is transferor, any sum by way of consideration for transfer of any property, right? Shall of the time of credit of such amount, such sum to the account of the transfer, or at the time of payment of such sum in cash by issue of check. So when transferee, that is person B, is paying to me, that is the transferor, he can deduct TDS. When I'm selling my immovable property to person B and he's paying something in cash or check or draft, he will deduct TDS amount. Now, what is that TDS amount? Deduct amount equal to 1% of such sum as income tax thereon. Now, what is the exemption limit? No deduction where the consideration for the transfer of an immovable property is less than 50 lakhs. So you must have seen that most of the people try to take money in the white paper money as less than 50 lakh and remaining as black money, right? Just because TDS is not deducted. I'm also telling you the loopholes why people do so. Reason is to avoid TDS, to avoid their taxations. Non-applicability of TDS. The provisions of section 203A containing the requirement of obtaining tax deduction account number shall not apply to the person required to deduct tax in accordance with the provisions of section 194(1)(a), right? So where this section is not applicable, this section is not applicable where we do not have TAN, right? Payment of rent by certain individuals or Hindu undivided family. Now, we had an exception in that case, that we were just cutting out the rent and HUF case. Now we are bringing that case back, right? Now, when rent is paid by individuals, by HUF, what is the case of TDS? Whether it is applicable, whether it is not applicable, let's see. Any person being an individual or a HUF, other than those individual or HUF whose total sales, gross receipts, or turnover from the business or profession carried on by him exceed the monetary limits of rupees 1 crore. Means if his business has monetary limits exceeding 1 crore, or profession amount, professional means any professional he is carrying on, the individual, maybe the teacher, maybe as a doctor, maybe as a consultant, maybe as a financial advisor, whatever profession he is conducting, and that amount, that total receipts is more than 50 lakhs, that is applicable, right? Other than those individuals, or HF whose total sales from business or profession carried on by him exceed these limits, respectively, in the immediately preceding financial year, responsible for paying to a resident any income by way of rent exceeding 50,000 for a month or part of the month during the previous year shall deduct an amount equal to 5% of such income as income tax thereon. So I will just again brief it out. We are talking about any person who is individual or HUF, right? पहले वाले केस में individual और HUF को cut कर दिया था. Now we are talking here any person who is individual or HUF other than those individuals whose such amount is exceeding 1 crore. Means those individuals or HUFs who have business or profession exceeding, giving gross receipts exceeding 1 crore and 50 lakh respectively. We are not talking about accepting those. Any individual or HUF is paying rent which is exceeding 50,000 per month or part of the month shall deduct an amount equal to 5%, right? The deduction of tax is to be made at the time of credit of rent for the last month of the previous year or the last month of the tenancy, right? If the property is vacated during the year, now suppose if there is vacation during the year, financial year is 1st April 2024 to 31st March 2025, current financial year, and suppose the property is being vacated in February itself, then what happens? If the property is vacated during the year to the account of the payee or at the time of payment thereof. So whenever you are making payment, it is said that TDS is deducted mostly at the end of the financial year, basically when we are paying the last month's rent, that is on 31st March, right? And basically this is the financial year I'm only taking as the rent agreement period. Suppose rent agreement period is from 1st May to 30th April. So my last month rent would be 30th April. So if I'm paying last month rent on 30th April, I will deduct my TDS on 30th April, right? Now suppose I have the contract period from 1st May to 30th April, but my property is being vacated. I'm vacating this property by February 28th. So I can deduct my TDS on February 28th. It basically says whatever last rent you are paying, that is in that case you deduct the TDS. Timing of TDS, obviously when you're crediting the rent for the last month of the previous year or the last month of tenancy, last month of the previous year is March in this financial year, in this previous year. Last month of tenancy, if previous year financial year is different to the tenancy period, that is my tenancy period is 1st May to 30th April. It is different from financial year. Then my last month of payment is 30th April. If the property is vacated during the year to the account of payee or at the time of payment thereof in cash or by issue of check. So it is as simple as that. Last month of tenancy or last month of financial year or the month of vacancy, whichever is earlier, right? In that case, we deduct the TDS. Now, non-applicability of this section. The provision of section 203A containing the requirement of obtaining TAN shall not apply to the person required to deduct tax in accordance with the provisions of section 194(1)(b. Right? So, those require the this provision, section 203, containing the requirement of TAN shall not apply to the person required to deduct tax. So this TAN requirement is not applicable. Deduction not to exceed rent for last month. In a case where the tax is required to be deducted as per the provisions of section 206AA, such deduction shall not exceed the amount of rent payable for the last month of the previous year or the last month of the tenancy. So it is basically saying whatever TDS you are deducting, it should not exceed the rent amount that you are last paying. Now, payment under specified agreement. Any person responsible for paying to a resident any sum by way of consideration, not being consideration in kind. So when I say I'm paying in consideration but not in kind, means I'm not paying by way of car or certain non-monetary benefits, right? I'm paying in consideration but not in kind. Under the agreement referred to in section 45 subsection 5A, shall at the time of credit of such sum to the account of payee or at the time of payment thereof in cash or by issue of a check or draft or by any other mode, whichever is earlier, deduct an amount equal to 10% of such sum as income tax thereon, right? So we are saying that any person who is paying to resident by way of consideration, right, can deduct at 10%, not in kind provided income tax, right? So this is a specified agreement, right, where we are paying in consideration but not in kind, right? And maybe basically we are trying to say that we are not paying in cash. We are paying maybe in check or maybe in I am paying rent to person B in rupees, but now I have promised him to pay in pounds. So it is not directly the currency I'm paying, but it is not in kind as well, right? So it has to be monetary way of paying only the consideration against the rent, and it is a specified agreement. In that case, 10% is deductible. Now, fees for professional or technical services. Any person, not being individual or HUF, who is responsible for paying to a resident any sum by way of fees for professional services or fees for technical services, or any remuneration of fees or commission by whatever name called, other than those on which tax is deductible under Section 192 to a director of a company. I am paying fees to professional services for professional services. I am paying fees for technical services, or I am paying any fees or remuneration or commission to a director of a company, right? Royalty. Fourth is royalty. I'm paying on any sum referred to in section 28 VA, that is fees for non-competence. So these are the four things I'm paying to a resident, and I'm not an individual, I'm not an Hindu divided family. Then what is the case? Rate of TDS is 2% of such sum in case of fees for technical services not being a professional service, or royalty, where such royalty is in consideration, nature of consideration for sale, distribution, or exhibition of cinematographic films, and 10% of such sum in other cases. So basically, we are saying it's basically payment to, see, we are getting the professional services of film stars or technicians at the shoot. I'm just taking one random example. So in that case, this is applicable, right? In case of fees for technical services not being a professional service, in case of fees for royalty, it is 2%. Right? Royalty is where we are paying royalty in nature of consideration for sale or distribution or exhibition of cinematographic films. Right? In case of a payee engaged only in the business of operation of call center. So in all these three cases, we are paying 2%. In any other cases, we are deducting 10%. Right? Timing of TDS, it is to be done at the time of payment or at the time of issue of check, whichever is earlier. Right? Threshold limit for deduction means if I am issuing a check right now, which is given, today is maybe 22nd, I'm issuing a check right now for the 31st March thing, and I will deduct TDS right now on my check. I will mention it. Or if I pay cash on 31st March, so that cash on 31st March is later, right? So that later part is not considered, whichever is earlier, paying cash on the due date or issuing check before the due date. We are issuing check before the due date, so TDS is deducted at the time of issuing check. No deduction shall be made if such amount of fees or credited or paid during the financial year to the paid does not exceed what? These limits. Nature of payment, professional fees 30,000. So if I'm paying less than 30,000 as my professional fees, no TDS is deducted. Fees for technical services 30,000. Fees of commission by whatever name called other than those on which tax is deductible under section 192 to a director of a company, nil. Right? So there is no exemption limit for this. Royalty 30,000. Any sum transferred to in section 28 subsection VA 30,000. Now, individual or HUF not to deduct tax if the payment is for personal use, right? If I'm paying I'm paying for professional services, technical services for my personal use, no need to deduct TDS. An individual or HUF shall not liable to deduct income tax on the sum payable by way of fees for professional services in case such sum is credited or paid exclusively for personal purpose, right? So personal purpose is not supposed to have this TDS deduction. Meaning of certain terms. Now they are just explaining what does professional services include, what does technical services include. We are just briefly discussing. Professional services means the services rendered by a person in the course of carrying on legal, medical, engineering, or architectural profession, or the profession of accountancy or technical consultancy or interior decoration or advertising or such other profession as is notified by the board for the purpose of section 44 AA or of this section, right? So legal, medical, engineering, architectural, maybe construction related, any such accountancy, maybe of CA, right? Fees for technical services shall have the same meaning as in explanation 2 of section 9 subsection 1 subsection 7. Royalty shall have the same meaning as in explanation 2 of section 9, subsection 1, subsection 6. So it's not mentioned here, but we are not supposed to go into these details. We are just discussing how TDS is deducted on these services. Income in respect of units, section 194K, inserted by Act number 2 of 2020 with effect from 1st April 2020. So there have been changes made in this section with effect from 1st April 2020. Applicability of TDS. Any person responsible for paying to a resident any income in respect of units of mutual fund specified under section 10, units from the administrator of the specified undertaking, units from the specified company shall deduct income tax thereon. So if I'm paying in respect of units, means they are selling their units, and units are mutual funds, administrator of specified undertaking, or units from a specified company. TDS is 10%. Timing at the time of payment or at the time of credit, whichever is earlier. Exemption limit is 5,000. Where the amount of such income, or as the case may be, aggregate of the amount of such income credited or paid or likely to be credited or paid during the financial year by the person responsible for making the payment to the account of or to the paid does not exceed 5,000. Right? If the income is of the nature of capital gains. So there are two exemptions. If it is of capital gains nature, capital, I have bought the mutual fund, right, for the purpose of having capital gains. I'm buying right now with the motive that I will sell after a few years with a high when it has high price so that I can earn profit on that. That is capital gains, right? So if I am selling and I'm having the income in the nature of capital gains, this TDS is not applicable. And if the amount does not exceed 5,000, TDS is not applicable. Meaning of certain terms, what is administrator as per this section? It is defined in section 2, subsection A of the UTI, Unit Trust of India. Specified company is a company as referred to in section 2 subsection H of the UTI. Specified undertaking shall have the meaning assigned to it in section 2 subsection 1 of the UTI. Now, payment of compensation on acquisition of certain immovable property. What is the case of deduction of TDS when I am paying against the acquisition of immovable property? Means I'm purchasing an immovable property, right? So I'm paying certain compensation. What TDS can be deducted? Applicability date and timing of TDS. Any person responsible for paying to a resident any sum being in nature of compensation or the enhanced compensation or the consideration or the enhanced consideration on account of compulsory acquisition under any law for the time being in force of any immovable property other than agricultural land. So there is an exception that we do not talk about the agricultural land. Agricultural land is excluded from this, it's exempted from this thing. Shall at the time of payment deduct TDS of 10%. So when I am selling my immovable property and it is not the agricultural land, right, then I can deduct the TDS at 10%. Now, what is the exemption limit? Exemption limit is 2,50,000. No deduction shall be made under this section where the amount of such payment or the aggregate amount of such payment during the financial year does not exceed 2,50,000. Non-applicability, when this section is not applicable, this section is not, no deduction shall be made where such payment is made in respect of any award or agreement which has been exempted from levy of income tax. I'm buying one immovable property and it is in respect of certain section which is exempted under income tax. No TDS has to be deducted. Now, next is income by way of interest from infrastructure debt fund, where any income by way of interest is payable to a non-resident, not being a company, or to a foreign company. So here the payment is being made to a non-resident, right? It is being made to a non-resident, not being a company, or to a foreign company. by an infrastructure debt fund referred to in section 10 subsection 47, the person responsible for making the payment shall at the time of credit of such income to the account of the payee, or at the time of payment of, or at the time of payment in cash or issue of check or draft, whichever is earlier, deduct TDS at 5%. So I am paying income by way of interest. I'm paying interest amount on these infrastructure debt funds to a non-resident or to a foreign company. TDS is deducted at 5%, right? Not to a resident. Income in respect of units of investment fund, where any income, see, income is of two types: when I'm selling the funds, when I'm getting the interest. So where any income other than proportion of income which is of the same nature as income referred to in section 10 subsection 23 f double b is payable to a unit holder, right? So what is happening? We are making payment to a unit holder. Unit holder is who has purchased certain units, or who has purchased this investment. So when, see, I will give you one example here. When you invest in mutual funds, I hope you all are aware that you are buying their units. You invest 10,000 in mutual funds. A random example. I'm not taking any particular mutual fund example. I have invested 10,000 rupees in mutual funds. So that 10,000 does not mean you have purchased 10,000 units, right? I hope you all are aware of this fact. It depends upon the price of that unit. If the price of that unit is maybe 2,000, so I have purchased 10,000 divided by 2,000, that is 5 units. I'm giving you a very random example. And of course, these units are in decimals as well at times. If suppose you buy maybe an Axis ELSS, that is a tax saving 3-year mutual fund program. So whenever you see the statement, you have that you have these many units, which is divisible, like they are in decimals also. So who is a unit holder? Who has made investment in such mutual funds. Here we are talking not about the mutual funds, we are talking about units of investment funds, which is obviously similar. So if I am the holder of this investment fund and I am getting certain income as per this section, so TDS is applicable at the time of credit of such income. So what rate? At the rate of 10%, where payee is a resident. Oops, right? Where payee is a resident. Or what is the second case? Second case is where the rates enforced where the payee is a non-resident, not being a company or a foreign company. So there are two cases. We have divided this case into two: resident and non-resident. In case of resident, it is 10%. In case of non-resident and not being a company or a foreign company, right? An individual or HUF 30%, firms, cooperative society, local authority 40%. So resident 10%, non-resident provided only these two cases. Non-resident should not be a company or a foreign company. Non-applicability of TDS. When this section is not applicable, it is not applicable where the payee is not resident, not being a company or a foreign company. No deduction shall be made. So that is why they have said, basically, if you are paying to a non-resident company or a foreign company, right, your TDS is exempted. Income in respect of investment in securitization trust. Now, these are basically various types of funds, trusts. We have talked about mutual funds. We have talked about Unit Trust of India. We have talked about this infrastructure debt funds. We have talked about this investment fund. And now we are talking about this investment in securitization trust, where any income is payable being a resident in respect of such investment in a securitization trust specific in clause D of the explanation occurring after section 115 TCA at the rate if the payee is an individual or HUF 25%. If the payee is any other person, it is 30%. Income payable net of tax, where under an agreement or other arrangement, the tax chargeable on any income referred to in the foregoing provisions of this chapter is to be borne by the person by whom income is payable. So obviously they are saying that okay, whatever TDS is deducted. Besides that, your income still exceeds the exemption limit. Income taxes to be paid. Interest or dividend or any other sum payable to government, reserve bank, or certain corporations, section 196. Now, what is the case when I am paying interest or dividend or other sums payable to government, reserve bank, or certain corporations? No deduction. If the interest or dividend is paid to the government, to RBI, or to certain specified list of corporations which are predefined, which comes as a part of government only, then there is no TDS deducted. No deduction of tax from any sum payable to the government, RBI, a corporation established by or under a central act which is under any law for the time being in force exempt from income tax on its income, or a mutual fund specified under section 10 subsection 23D. Right? So if it is payable to this or payable to this fund or payable to this corporation established under central act, no TDS is deducted. So our government does not pay taxes. We are supposed to pay taxes to government. Income in respect of units of non-residents, section 196A. Now, when I'm paying income to non-residents in respect of certain units, certain investment they have hold, basically the mutual funds, any person responsible for paying to a non-resident, and again, this foreign company is excluded, not being a company or to a foreign company, any income in respect of units of a mutual fund. So we are paying in respect of a mutual fund specified under section 10 subsection 23D or from the specified company, referred to in the explanation to clause 35 of section 10, shall at the time of credit of such income, whichever is earlier, deduct income tax thereon at the rate of 20%. So basically, I'm paying against mutual funds, right, to non-resident, and foreign companies excluded. If I'm paying to foreign company, it is not deductible. Tax is not deductible, it is exempted. So any amount paid in respect of mutual funds to a non-resident, right? TDS of 20%, straight 20%. No deduction is made from any income in respect of units of UTI. So if it is the units of Unit Trust of India, no deduction is to be there to a non-resident Indian or non-resident HUF. Now, income from foreign currency bonds or shares of Indian company, where any income by way of interest or dividends in respect of bonds or global depository receipts referred to in section 115 AC or by way of long-term capital gains arising from the transfer of such bonds or global depository receipts. So, long term capital gains means what is long term capital gain? It is over the many years, like more than 2-3 years, right? So, long term capital gain, agar mujhe ho raha hai global depository receipts pe and foreign currency, then we can have. So, if I am having any interest or dividend income on these foreign currency bonds, or these shares of Indian companies or on these global depository receipts. So my first income is way of interest or dividends. Second way of income is when I'm selling and I am having long-term capital gain. It is payable to a non-resident. The person responsible for making the payment shall at the time of credit of such income to the account of the payee or at the time of payment thereof, whichever is earlier, deduct income tax thereon at the rate of 10%. So TDS is deductible at the rate of 10%. Right. Now, there is one more section in this, which is section 1940. That is how e-commerce operators deduct TDS. So, e-commerce operators shall deduct TDS at 0.1% of the gross amount of the sale of goods, provision of services, or both made by the e-commerce participant, right? The e-commerce operator, that is the person who is operating the business on website, can deduct 0.1% of the gross amount of the sales or provision of services or both made by the e-commerce participant on the platform facilitated by the e-commerce operator. So 0.1% they can deduct, and there is no kind of exemption limit and that. Now, we discussed all this just to have a brief knowledge. We don't have to like go into details, but we should know that how exemption limits are applicable in TDS and why TDS is deducted. Now, the employer basically deducts TDS on salary. I'll just brief it out. What are the consequences and what are not? So employer just deducts the TDS on salary, and other way of income is provided by the employee to the employer that these are the other sources of income. So if the employer sees that the income stays within the taxation limit, within the exemption limit, he is not supposed to deduct TDS. He can avoid deducting TDS and there is no penalty for that, right? And if the income exceeds the exemption limit, he has to deduct TDS and he has to file TDS in every quarter for the employees. And there is a penalty if the employer does not file TDS for the employee who has the income exceeding the exemption limit as per the income tax, then the employer has to pay penalty kind of 1% as interest or 200 per day, right? So now suppose I am having multiple employers. I just gave you example 2-3 sessions back that I am being the professor in Delhi University and I am being the assistant professor in one college, maybe SRCC, and the guest lecturer in Khalsa and Daulatram. So is Khalsa and Daulatram supposed to deduct TDS? Khalsa and Daulatram are not supposed to deduct TDS if it is under the exemption limit, but yes, they can still deduct TDS to be on safer side. But if I provide the TDS details to all the employers and ask one of the employer to deduct TDS and request not to deduct TDS by other two employers, that can be possible, right? Now, what happened in my case that my income was not exceeding the exemption limit, and I was only working as a guest lecturer for some time in Hindu college. But still, Hindu college, even on amount of rupees 16,000 during the whole financial year, I was employed for like last month on emergency basis because some senior and permanent teacher was on some medical leave. So I had to take 25 lectures and I had some payment of approx maybe 25,000. So on that 25,000, the TDS was deducted by Hindu college. And when I say about Khalsa College, I completed many terms as guest lecturer in Khalsa College, and Khalsa College did not deduct any TDS on my guest lecture income. Reason being, it was not in the not exceeding the exemption limit. So every employer behaves differently, but yes, employer is in trouble when the income is exceeding the exemption limit. Then he has to deduct the TDS and he has to file TDS every quarter. And there are many other details we will see in coming chapters. So, yeah, I've written here also. If lower TDS is deducted, reason by employee means suppose the employer is deducting TDS as a less amount, means suppose he had to deduct TDS of rupees 1 lakh, but he has deducted only 90,000. So he has to specify the reason why he is deducting the lower TDS, right? And obviously, he can go for the consequences as penalty. So why employer is doing so and why he's deducting less TDS, why he's deducting higher TDS, why he's deducting no TDS, he's not deducting at all, he has to be alert on that part. Many employers ask for Form 12B, and the what employee can do if we have multiple employees, Form 12B can be submitted to one employer, and obviously there is interest on penalty for not filing TDS at all if the income of the employee is exceeding exemption limit. Means if the income is taxable, then the employer is supposed to, right? He has to see all sources of income. That is why they ask that during the financial year, if you have done Sukanya Yojana, if you have done LIC policy, or if you have done Access ELSS, whatever I'm just talking about few ATC to ATU deductions. There are many. So if you have invested in certain deductions and your taxable income is within the exemption limit, then employer can avoid the taxation. But most of the employers still deduct TDS to be on safer side to avoid penalties. Now, TDS form, what is the form of TDS? It is form 24Q for salaries, and we have list of forms 24 with different alphabets. For salaries, it is 24Q. Now, this is our main part. We are here to discuss how TDS is enabled and done on Tally, right? Now, first step is go to Tally 9 gateway, press F11. We are talking about here Tally 9 software, and the latest is we have many more latest versions of Tally. Tally 9 gateway, press on gateway of Tally. Basically, it's saying press F11 and go to the statutory and taxation. So this we have already discussed in many previous classes. I think we discussed 4 or 5 classes back, but we have to revise it so that we can know how we will activate Tally and TDS in Tally. On gateway of Tally, press F11. Go to statutory and taxation and set enable TDS as yes, right? Statutory or taxation mein we are supposed to enable TDS by default. It means by default TDS is set as no. Now, then create a ledger account in the name of TDS account under the group duties and taxes. So there is a pre-group already created, duties and taxes under current liabilities, and I need to create a ledger in that. Type of duty or tax, select as TDS, right? Means we are defining a ledger under the main group, so we have to select it as TDS. Nature of payment, you can select payment of rent on buildings. Basically, we are talking about on which TDS has to be deducted, and we are saying suppose we are deducting TDS on rent on buildings. Ignore TDS exemption limit. Now they are saying if the income is within the exemption limit, you are supposed to ignore or you are supposed to deduct. See, there is an option that if it is within the exemption limit, you can ignore deducting TDS, but you can still deduct TDS. Yes. So it is your call how you have to behave in your Tally account. Then create another ledger account. For example, create YZ company under the group of S creditors. So S creditors means sundry creditors. Sundry creditors is again a pre-group created by Tally, and we are creating YZ company under this group. Maintain bill by bill. Yes. Maintain bill by bill account. Is TDS applicable? Right? Yes. Enter TDS details like deductee type, whether individual or company. Means जिसका हम TDS deduct कर रहे हैं. I am the deductor and this YZ company is the deductee. So I need to enter the TDS details of this deductee YZ company. Whether this it is a whether the deductee is a company or is an individual, I have to specify. Then next step is create another ledger of rent under indirect expenses. Right now, what we have done till now. First of all, we have activated TDS by going to gateway of Tally F11, activated TDS under statutory and taxation. Next, we have created few ledgers under pre-created groups. First ledger we have created as this TDS under duty or tax, selected as TDS. Then you have to provide certain details of TDS. Do you want to follow exemption limit or not? Then you create another ledger of the company of the deductee, and you have to provide the TDS details for the deductee. So you are creating ledger of this deductee, you are creating ledger of tax, and also you are creating another third ledger of rent, TDS, and deductee. These 3 ledgers are created. Now, suppose now this is our example. Enter the transaction in journal voucher. Rent account debited 1,40,000. YZ company account credited 118370. TDS account credited 21630. So what is basically happening? We are paying rent to this sundry creditor, that is YZ company, rent on buildings. Rent is an indirect expense, so that is why we have created under indirect expense group. Entry is expenses are supposed to be debited, so rent account debited. This amount will be full 1,40,000. Then to YZ company account credited 118370. So YZ company is actually receiving this amount because we are deducting TDS on it as 21,630, and we need to post it in journal voucher. How I'm sorry, the screen is little blurred, but I'll try to explain as much as possible. Journal number 2, this is second voucher. If you all remember, we have the date here, right? Particulars, basically rent on building, current balance is automatically shown 1,40,000 and it is on debit. So this is the whole amount, this is the whole expense. Then TDS tally automatically calculates TDS and net amount. If I have filled the TDS is supposed to be deducted at this rate, then this is pre-calculated by tally, the TDS amount, right? This is how tally helps us in making TDS deductions. And YZ company, this also is again pre-calculated. We just have to fill this amount. That rent is 1,40,000 to be paid, so it automatically calculates TDS this much and 1,10,000. Obviously, we have to specify to follow the exemption limit or not, and we can provide in narration. So tally will select only one transaction TDS amount. If not, just a second. Tally will select only one transaction TDS amount automatically. If not activate, then calculate yourself and write. Right? If it says basically if it is not activated, the TDS thing, then it will not automatically calculate. Then you have to fill that TDS amount. That also can be done. Then payment entry would be you have to write the same amount of TDS you have to calculate. So basically, if you activate the TDS option, this is pre-filled. If you do not activate the TDS option, then you have to calculate yourself and you can write these figures 21,630 and the remaining figure. So TDS account debited to bank account. This is the next payment entry. After this, you see the status report in computation of TDS, gateway of tally, display, statutory reports, TDS report, and computation. Basically, you can see how this TDS is computed and calculated, right? So TDS reports can be seen like this. I will repeat: gateway of tally, display, and in display we have these statutory reports, TDS reports, and then you can see the computation. The C, I will again make you remind all of you that we have certain alphabet keyboard shortcuts. C for computation, R for challan reconciliation, U for return, E for e-return, O for outstandings and exception reports, has X and Q to quit this screen, right? So we have activated TDS, we have created ledgers, and then we have posted this journal entry in journal voucher. And after posting this journal entry, you make the payment entry that TDS is paid to via bank. We are making the payment to government, and we can see the report by going from gateway of tally to display to statutory reports to TDS report and to computation. Yes, Form 16 is the form provided by the employer. It is only for salary and it shows where TDS is deducted on salary. Form 16A, TDS on income other than salary. For example, you are having the interest income on FDs or on your mutual funds or any other source of income that is shown in Form 16A. So bank also deducts TDS on your FD amount or if on your savings account balance if the interest is exceeding the exemption limit, right? So this is how Form 16A looks like. Certificate of deduction of tax at source under section 203 of the Companies Act, and you can see name and address of the person deducting the tax, right? Acknowledgement number of all quarterly statement of TDS under subsection. So we have different quarters as what I'm talking about and acknowledgement number. So TDS has to be submitted every quarter. Name and address of the person to whom payment made or in whose account it is credited. So we are again talking about YZ company, which is in question. This is the deductee. Tax deduction account of the deductor, PAN number of the deductor, nature of payment. Then this is the act mentioned, PAN number of the payee, right? Everything is specified. So this is how Form 16A looks like. Now there is one more example on how TDS is deducted. Let us just read it quickly. How to do it manually. Gateway F11 set TDS as no, right? If I'm setting TDS as no in my tally, I am doing it manually, right? Manually means I am filling all details. I am calculating TDS. I am seeing whether it is an exemption limit or not. And I am pre-calculating and I will also calculate the balance figure. Now in Gateway F11 set TDS as no, and in XYZ company TDS applicable no. You enter every transaction in purchase account in voucher mode, not in voice mode. Second step, calculate the TDS manually. Suppose it is 21630 on rent payment of rupees 1,40,000. See update amendments of income tax law relating to TDS provisions. Then after creating normal ledger of party, rent and TDS, the following entry will pass. Rent, YZ, TDS. So what they're saying is we are doing just two differences. If I put TDS as yes here, these two amounts are calculated by Tele after following the exemption limits, after following the income tax. And if I put it as no, I have to calculate myself manually these two figures after seeing this updated amendments of income tax law, right? So both can be done. If I want to do as per my, if suppose my tally software is not updated with the latest amendments, I can do it manually also, whatever mode I prefer. Or this basically manual mode is basically when you have to make your own discretion that you want to deduct more TDS or you want to deduct less TDS. In that case, you can follow this TDS as no. Exempt TDS if payment is not more than 1,20,000. If more than 1,20,000, then 10% of payment. So this can be followed by me. This is my own limit. At the end of the month, I will pass the voucher entry of payment of TDS, which is calculated by you in payment voucher. So this comes in payment voucher. What entries comes in payment voucher? Where we have payment via bank or cash. And that entry is to be done in journal voucher, right? So basically we have learned how to do TDS calculations if I put TDS settings as yes, or how to do TDS calculations manually if I put TDS as no in my statutory and taxation screen. That's all for today. In next class, we will start with tax collected at source. You all are welcome to put any doubts if you have. Ma'am, please explain. Can you give more examples on technical services under 194J? What are services? See, these all are services. When if we keep on discussing each and every subsection here, then it is unending, I must say. And when I say technical services under 194J, it's basically when you are talking about major let me go back to that section and I'll make you show that there is an unending list to that. So we were here in fees for professional and technical services, right? So we were talking about technical services and there was a definition also, a little bit briefing on what is technical services. Just a second. Professional services means services rendered by a person in the course of carrying on legal, medical, engineering, or architectural profession, or the profession of accountancy or technical consultancy. So, actually, this professional services have itself defined as the professional services, that what services are included in these technical basically means when you are talking about on technical part, maybe, well, how should I explain, maybe when you are hiring a company for yes, when you are hiring a company to set up artificial intelligence, right? In the technical things in your company, the artificial intelligence, the Wi-Fi things. So whatever is it's not professional. You do not have a profession in providing in these installing these softwares and all, you have these technical services. So when you are hiring a company for installing this artificial intelligence or a particular software, maybe Tally, in your PC, in your organization, I'm just giving you a very random example, not any example specified in income tax, and you're paying fees to that company for such technical services which are supposed to be done by that company only, then that can be included in this technical service, right? So, and it's a list defined, and technical services shall have the same meaning as in explanation 2 of section 9 subsection 1 subsection 7. So basically saying it's a very maybe elongated list, that's why they have not specified, and it has a basically when you go to this list they will just make a big definition of what is technical services when you are making use of certain when you are making use of knowledge, when you are making use of knowledge of certain person or technicalities of certain person or a firm or an organization, that definition is there in this section, right? So they have simply to keep it simple, they have not defined here the entire list because we are not supposed to discuss in detail. We are not discussing income tax and each and every term here. We are just discussing if we are making payment to professional services, technical services, or the royalties, what is the TDS deducted. And I have just gave you a simple example that if you are hiring a technical service, maybe of installing certain softwares or certain things of a certain organized by a certain organization, and you're paying for that to that organization, then that is kind of technical service fee, technical fees you are paying, right? Where's the meeting? Just a second. Yeah. The next question is, what services comes under section 28 VA? It's basically we are trying to talk about the list of income tax that is specified in income tax rules. Yes. Any sum referred to in section 28 VA. See, we are talking about fees for professional or technical services or services is referred to in section 28A VA. So any fees when I'm talking about technical services, it's basically the services we have talked about the example right now. But when you open this section, I would request all of you to just open this section when you are ended with this session. They will just redefine what does technical and service means. They will say that any service by way of action or this provided to a company or this. So that is why these are just the definitions. So that is why they are not specified here. And we are not supposed to go into these details, but I will just briefly explain you that when I'm talking about royalty or any service, so they're basically saying that we have royalty and they have already defined royalty service here, that royalty in respect of the cinematographic services, right? Somewhere it was written, right? So I don't know where it was written. It was just written that the royalty in case of cinema, yeah, where such royalty is in the nature of consideration for sale, distribution, or exhibition of cinematographic films. So you know that we earn royalty on books, on cinematographic films. We have certain royalties. So such services which are royalty bound come under these sections, right? So technical services is services that we are availing for their technical skills, and technical skills are not to be confused with professional. Professional is a person related, maybe medical, maybe engineering and all. Technical is like when you are trying to install certain major technical softwares in your company and you want to avail certain services, and royalty things come under this section. Okay, so you can go and have a reading of all these things. It's an unending list, Ma'am, 194O, please explain once again. Actually, there is mentioned TDS on sale of goods. 194O is basically when e-commerce is being we are talking about e-commerce thing. 194O means when e-commerce operators deduct TDS on sale of goods. So if I am buying certain beauty product from not from the physical store, but I'm buying from this online store, right? So the online store can deduct TDS on that product. So that is TDS on sale of goods, right? So 194O is the section that governs the sale which is done on website. Ma'am, if individual person doing business as proprietorship firm, then whether he needs to take TAN number or not, deduct the TDS on payment, is there any limit or not applicable? Yes, of course. Means if you are having a business and you are supposed to deduct TDS on sale of goods, then of course he needs, without taking TAN number, you cannot deduct TDS. You cannot file the TDS returns. So TAN number has to be taken to deduct TDS, right? And of course, now the business deducts TDS and they have rules according to their own organizations, and they have to follow the income tax rules and the limits. Where basically here we have discussed that when a salary is paid to the employee, or we are paying any amount, maybe by way of rent or by way of um, mutual funds, or by way of consideration against the immovable property, how and when TDS is deducted, or when we are getting certain incomes, how and when TDS is deducted by basically salary and other sources of income. And when we talk about businesses and sale of goods, yes, TDS is deducted on sale of goods and TAN number has to be taken. Without TAN number, you cannot deduct TDS. And there is no kind of exemption limits, or there are certain rules defined for deducting TDS on sale of goods, but I would not say as an exemption limit. But yes, obviously we can go through that while deducting TDS on sale of goods. If company paying security amount, what is the treatment under journal entry? How to record this under tally? What security amount? Miss Praveen, can you please explain me what kind of security amount we are talking about? Rent. If the company is paying rent, okay, security before the rent. What is the treatment under journal entry and how we have to record this under tally? Suppose you are having the rental of suppose 50,000 and you need to pay 1,50,000 as security, 3 months advance rent. So you can obviously create a ledger first of all, like rent is created in that, and security is also created as an indirect expenses ledger, and you can define and security to bank whenever it is paid, right, under the payment ledger, right? So I think all is good. And yes, Praveen, I would like you to see section 28 VA and 194J. You can just have a reading of all the list, because see, income tax is not a thing that as you all can see that it has such elaborated statements. They define each and every word, when paid or if to be paid, whichever is earlier. So this language is already included in these things, and these services 28VA and 194J is already minutely explained in this 194J professional and technical services. So basically, it's not something which we are excluding from here. It's like we are basically saying that services as a profession or as a technical, whatever service we are hiring, we can deduct TDS depending upon the payment we are making, right? So we will continue in next class. There is no easy way to remember these sections. What you all can do, what I used to do was to make when you learn this income tax, basically this is just for your knowledge. You don't have to remember each and every crux because tally does most of things. But yes, you should be aware of the exemption limits and the rates and the non-applicability of TDS. So it is the best way to remember is to make a table, right? And give the headings, the rates, the non-applicability of TDS, and when it should be applicable. Because when you're aware of these tables and these exemptions, you cannot learn it by heart, each and everything. You have to have it for your reference, right? So that is the best way, because there's lots of payment done by company for rendering the services, and every time we need to check whether TDS is to be deducted or not on the payment. Yes, so yeah, this requires hard work. You have to make a table, and I would say that this is just a brief explanation of TDS. We have just covered TDS. We have not talked about the income tax, right? We have not talked about the tax on other sources of income. We have just talked about how TDS has to be enabled on Tally. Our main motive is just to discuss how TDS is enabled on Tally. How do we put entries of Tally by creating ledgers, and how the rates are applicable, right? In Tally. And unless and until we know these bases, how can we just operate on Tally? We cannot operate. We will not be aware कि इतना Tally ने क्यों 10% deduct किया, 20% deduct, right? So we should be aware of these things, and the best way is to make a table and then you can recall. Okay. Thank you for today. I hope there are no other questions. Thank you, everyone.